one thing to remember when, just from what was just said, when you've got a failing startup and you're about to just bury it, when you're up here on stage 10 years later, no one will remember. You feel terrible, but people talk about the 3 that went well, not the 6 that I screwed up. So, off topic, but so I want to talk about, this is not, there we go. So I want to talk about e-commerce, user acquisition. The reason that I want to talk about it is because of the kind of funding environment that we're going into, right? Things have been pretty great since the iPhone App Store kicked off now 6 years ago. And that's all wearing out, right? And you're beginning to see the smartest venture capitalists warn their companies to spend money slower, right? No one is warning, Uber or Airbnb or any of the crazy breakout successes, but 99% of startups that have venture capital, and got it in the ways the last 2 speakers spoke about, are being warned to be careful for a couple of years, right? And this is in San Francisco where capital is relatively available. And so for everybody else, I want to talk a little bit about the kinds of business practices that will still have capital available to them even when things get a little bit bad, right? Because that's what I believe is going on. So we're going to face 2 years of lower funding levels because the App Store model is wearing out, because the U.S. presidential election cycle always screws things up, and a couple other secondary reasons, right? So what we're living in right now and what Apple imposed on the rest of us is a walled garden world, right? We do not have an open internet. You can't, in any practical way, just throw up a website and end up with a bunch of customers. You're going to have to dig into Google one way or another, whether it's the Android store, Play Store, whether it's Google Ad Exchange, whether it's Facebook, smaller, Twitter, Pinterest. You're going to have to dig into one of these very protected environments to go figure out how to get your customers. And I just threw this up because this was the most obvious news from the last week of exactly how bad this can get, right? Where some great guys out of London called DataSift have built a super startup selling Twitter data for the last 5 or 6 years. And Twitter, without much warning this week, said, oh, I'm sorry. As of August 13th, you don't get any more of our data. Good luck, right? And I think there's about 120 people working at DataSift, and Nick's very smart, and he has a plan, and he has a Facebook partnership now, and all kinds of things. But if you're sitting there, you got to wonder if Facebook's going to say the same thing someday, right? So right now, we all have to worry about this in terms of piggybacking these big guys and have to do so very carefully. And, this isn't helpful, right? Apple very incrementally putting out a smaller device with not a lot of new tech that isn't, nearly as radically innovative as the iPhone that came before it, right, is an indication of the market getting weaker, right, and more mature. And all the big money guys know this, understand it, are going to take more care in writing checks until some massive new innovation happens. But there's good news, right? The good news is that consumers really buy stuff on the internet, right? Every other time we've had a down cycle in funding, it was, a huge, failure problem for startups, and there was no way out. Now, if you actually can sell stuff to people, consumers don't care whether or not venture capitalists are spending money as to whether or not they're going to buy stuff on the internet. Right? And they're going to keep buying no matter whether or not there's a downturn on the funding side. And for a bunch of companies, that's a big savior, but you got to figure out how to make it big. Right? I'm not, something you call the Wolves Summit, I can't imagine is for people building a bunch of little businesses. So how do you take one of these things in this walled garden world where organic is very difficult, and how do you make it scale? Well, that's what, paid acquisition is about. And I have done a lot of it for a long time. Here's 4 of the hotter startups in the area. I'm involved. I picked them because I'm involved with all of them. And I want to take one example in particular of a guy who's doing a really great job of it and talk about his business as a model for what will be attractive for financing no matter how bad things get. Very quickly, I come at this point from the point of view of a venture capitalist. I have done, probably 10 startups, of which 3 anyone wants to remember, like we said at the beginning. In the 25 years I've been in Northern California, now I'm working for these guys who are a French-based $4 billion conglomerate that does a bunch of investing in a few areas, virtual reality, but also marketing technology, which is mainly where I focus. And, it's the same Technicolor from the last 100 years making, we made the Wizard of Oz, right, in terms of color. And so of the companies I work with, I want to point out these guys, right? Because they're very easy to, feel good about, right? It's not a bunch of PayPal alumni who we can never be, right? It's not someone with millions and millions of dollars, right? It's a former car salesman who took online lessons to teach himself to code 3 years ago and figured out how to build marketing tools for small businesses. Right? This is not a very high bar. He doesn't have a computer science degree. He doesn't have any of these things. However, he's got just about the best marketing tech startup out west at his scale. It's $5 million with 5 people, 5 employees with 1,000 customers as of this month, all of them brought in the last 6 months. And he's going to be able to raise money, right? Because what he can do is he can buy customers profitably on Facebook, right? And the real thing that everyone's looking for, even in down cycles, and I'll explain the chart in a moment, is how do I know in my most conservative moment that if $1 million goes into the marketing budget of this company, that $2 million is going to come out. And this guy and 1,000 other companies like him at different scales have exactly that. So what, in his particular case, he sells small business marketing services, right? He helps people who sell on eBay, people sell on Shopify, people sell on Etsy, do better marketing their products. And he can spend $25 on Facebook to acquire a customer who will pay him more than twice that inside of 100 days, right? And he seems to be able to do it for tens of thousands of dollars a month in spending himself, right? And this kind of thing is exactly fundable. It's fundable here. It's fundable in California. It's fundable anywhere, right? No matter how bad the environment gets, right? So he's got a very good knowledge of how much every customer makes him. It's around $120. They cost him $42 to get, and he has not yet found the limit of how many he can buy at once. Obviously, there will be some limit, but it appears to be thousands a month, right? And this sounds great, but it wasn't, once again, it wasn't some crazy elite team of people who found this. It was some guy and 4 buddies with a couple $100,000 in seed funding, right? And so what I'm encouraging is, if you have any revenue attached to customers at all, and it only takes $30 or $40 attached to each customer, start trialing how to advertise to acquire them on the main platforms, because we're stuck with the main platforms for another few years. And if you can get to a cost of buying them that is anywhere under 60% of what you're going to make on them, you start repeating that, right? So what this guy did was down here, and you can barely see the bars, but these are purple, right? And when he had absolutely no money, he went out there and blogged a lot and got some Facebook likes and started figuring out who his audience was at all. And then he started buying tiny amounts of advertising, right? He literally spent $200 in November. But the $200 made him, I think, $320, right? So he increased it a little bit in December. Boom, boom, boom. Here we are, and this is the number of customers, not the amount of dollars. But here we are in March and April. He spent $7,000 US in March because he could prove that he would make 12. And he's spending $10,000 this month. So he's gone from no customers to 1,000 since November, and is out not having very much trouble at all raising a real round of financing in order to try, instead of spending $7,000 or $10,000 a month, start spending $70,000 or $80,000 a month to try and make that green ramp work, right? And no one's really talked about the category of paid acquisition e-commerce businesses, but it's really what is attracting, the most reliable financing, and I personally believe will continue to, even as financing gets difficult. Largely another graph of the same thing, but from the dollars point of view, right? This is the revenue side instead of the number of subscribers. So, and I use Wizard of Oz photos to end with because of Technicolor, and I'm happy to help if someone's trying to figure out one of these opportunities. 39? Thank you. I was off by a decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.